On July 5, 1939, the U.S. began building its penultimate class of battleship. These were the 4 ships of the 37,970-ton South Dakota class. Design work on these ships hurriedly started in 1937 after the upgunning clause was invoked, but before the 45,000-ton weight increase of 1938 was allowed. Originally, only 2 were to have been built, but with war fast approaching, the order was doubled to speed production. The driving force behind this class was the increase in allowed main armament diameter due to Japan not signing the Second London Treaty. Because of this, the perceived default threat increased from 14 to 16-inch shells. Indeed, reports had already indicated Japan was working on a new special 16-inch gun. Unknown to anyone else, in reality, this was the 460mm or 18.1-inch gun. Since the previous class was right at, when completed actually over, the 35,000-ton weight limit, no additional armor could be added without sacrificing armament or speed or getting creative. Reducing armament wasn't considered acceptable, and reducing speed wasn't considered acceptable, so creative it was. While still being flush-decked, 49 feet was cut off the length, but not width, of the design to allow the same weight of armor to be thicker by not having as much area to cover. This change in length to beam ratio led to hydrodynamic issues which affected speed, which required the fitting of more powerful machinery. The most important change, though, was that the armor belt was thickened, angled outward further, and moved from being connected to the outside of the hull to the inside. Internal armor. The main reason for this change was that the Navy wanted to give these ships better protection against not only larger shells, but diving ones that hit or exploded below the waterline. This makes sense when you consider battles were expected to be fought at long range, where the majority of incoming fire would be plunging down on the ship. By making the armor internal, the layers of the TDS added to the effectiveness of the armor by helping cushion the blow even before it hit the belt. It also helped from a stability and hydrodynamic point of view. These were important points, as their length to beam ratio and the severe angling of armor would have seriously affected stability and hydrodynamics if fitted externally. While appealing, this did present the problem that if the armor was damaged, repairing it would mean removing the skin of the ship and digging through the layers of the TDS to get to it. The TDS also had to be rearranged to allow this new system on the limited weight. Namely, it had to shrink from 5 layers to 4. To make up for the loss of a layer, the sloped armor formed one of the torpedo bulkheads separating the layers, making it much more resistant to penetration. Main and secondary armament was mostly left numerically unchanged. Class Leader South Dakota was fitted as a fleet flagship, adding another level which could only be paid for by reducing the secondary armament. South Dakota was started July 5, 1939, and finished March 20, 1942. Indiana was started November 20, 1939, and finished April 30, 1942. Massachusetts was started July 20, 1939, and finished May 12, 1942. Alabama was started February 1, 1940, and finished August 16, 1942. Main armament was again 9 16-inch 45 caliber guns in 3 3-gun turrets. These were the same guns as carried by the preceding North Carolina class, so I won't rehash it. Secondary armament was again the standard 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose gun. Most carried 20 guns in 5 twin turrets midship on each side. As weight trade-off for the fleet flag bridge, South Dakota herself didn't carry the forwardmost 5-inch turret on each side. Instead, more medium anti-aircraft guns were fitted. Also, South Dakota herself carried these guns with turrets 2 and 3 one level above the main deck, and turrets 1 and 4 2 levels above the main deck. The other 3 ships had turrets 2 and 4 one level above the main deck, and turrets 1, 3, and 5 2 levels above the main deck. Propulsion was 8 boilers venting to one massive funnel built into the tower superstructure. These provided steam to 4 turbines which produced 130,000 horsepower. Each turbine, in turn, drove one of the 4 propellers for a top speed of 27 knots. Again, they had 2 rudders. Protection comprised internal side armor that ran from turret 1 to turret 3. This sloped outward 19 degrees from bottom to top and was 1 3/4 inch thick starting at the keel, increasing to 6 inches when 7 feet below the water line, forming the 3rd torpedo bulkhead of the TDS. There it became the armored belt and continued increasing up to 12 1/4 inches at the top where it met the armored deck. This slope gave her the equivalent of 15 1/2 inches of vertical armor. From there up to the main deck, hull armor was vertical and 1 1/2 inch thick. Deck armor was in 3 layers. The main deck was 1 1/2 inch thick and meant to trigger any hits. The second deck was 5 inches, increasing to 5 1/2 inches thick, and was the armored deck which formed the roof of the side armor. The third deck was 1/2 inch thick to catch any splinters from getting into the vitals. The ends of the armored box were formed by bulkheads 13 1/2 inches thick. Barbette armor was up to 17 inches thick. Turret armor was 18 inches thick on the front, 7 1/2 inches on the top, and 9 1/2 inches on the sides. Conning tower armor was 16 inches on the side and 7 1/2 inches on the roof. Like the previous class, the engine room was subdivided into 4 main compartments. Again, each ran the width of the hull uninterrupted so that if one flooded, the ship wouldn't roll over. Again, each compartment contained 2 boilers and 1 turbine, with each turbine directly driving a different propeller. To help protect the propellers and the magazine of Turret 3 from torpedoes, the outboard propellers were encased in deep skedges that ran all the way to the propeller blades, shielding the inner propellers. The TDS was 4 layers thick, with the outer 2 layers being liquid-filled and the inner 2 being empty. The first 3 layers were fitted between the ship's skin and the sloped internal armor. The 4th layer was fitted behind the armored belt, which acted as the 3rd torpedo bulkhead. Again, they were triple-bottomed, meaning they had 2 layers. Like the previous class, 3 float planes could be carried at the stern and launched off one of the 2 catapults. Like all battleships, though, there was no hangar. Modernizations were again light. Entering service during the war, they couldn't be spared for and didn't need any major upgrades. Modifications were limited to better radar and more and better light and medium anti-aircraft guns. South Dakota completed sea trials in mid-August 1942 and immediately headed for the Pacific. After repairing damage at Pearl Harbor due to grounding, she finally arrived in the Southwest Pacific with the carrier Enterprise, just in time to take part in the Battle of Santa Cruz. While defending Enterprise in that battle, she was hit on Turret 1 by a bomb. After the battle, on October 30th, she collided with the destroyer Mahan, but the damage was light. At the overnight Second Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, she suffered a well-documented loss of power when, apparently, an engineer tied several circuits down, effectively linking them in series instead of in parallel, which tripped a breaker due to the shock of prolonged firing. With power restored, she continued fighting, but took about 27 hits, including 6 14-inch shells, mostly in the superstructure. These knocked out her radar plot and several radio antennas. Though the damage looked and is often reported as severe, in reality it wasn't. In truth, hull integrity wasn't compromised. The ship's vitals were intact. Damage was superficial. In short, the all-or-nothing armor scheme that had been the cornerstone of U.S. battleship protection for 30 years had functioned exactly as designed in its only real trial. Following repairs at the East Coast, she joined the Atlantic Fleet in mid-February of 1943. In mid-May, she and sister Alabama joined the British Home Fleet and spent then until August of 1943 in the Norwegian Sea, both escorting convoys and trying to draw the German battleship Tirpitz out into an uneven fight. In mid-September, she rejoined the Pacific Fleet in the Southwest Pacific. She would spend most of the rest of the war escorting the carriers and occasionally providing fire support. This included the invasion of the Gilberts at the end of 1943, the invasion of the Marshalls in the first part of 1944, the invasion of the Caroline Islands and both raids on Truk and New Guinea in the second quarter of 1944, and the liberation of the Marianas in June. On June 19, 1944, at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, she was hit by a 250-kilogram bomb dropped by one of the very few aircraft that leaked through the combat air patrol. The damage was light, though. Repairs and overhaul were completed at the West Coast by late August. Returning to the fleet, she supported the raid on Taiwan, the liberation of Leyte and subsequent Battle of Leyte Gulf, the liberation of the northern Philippines, the invasion of Iwo Jima, and the invasion of Okinawa. While resupplying, on May 6, 1945, some powder bags exploded, causing a fire in Turret 2. Repaired yet again, she returned to the fleet at the start of July 1945 and took part in the shelling of the Japanese home islands until the end of the war. Post-war, she was put in reserve and finally sold for scrap in mid-1962. Indiana completed shakedown and immediately headed to the Southwest Pacific, arriving in late November of 1942. Upon arriving, she took up the role of escorting the carriers. Such would be her role for the majority of the war. She escorted the carriers for the rest of the Guadalcanal campaign and as troops moved up the Solomons. She then supported the invasion of the Gilberts and moved on to the Marshalls. On February 1, 1944, she collided with the battleship Washington. The damage to her starboard quarter was severe, far worse than first appeared. Some engineers even estimated that had Washington been going as little as 5 knots faster, Indiana's TDS might have been overwhelmed, leading to her sinking by the stern due to uncontrollable extensive flooding. Returning from repairs, she joined in the second raid on Truk near the end of April 1944. She then supported the invasion of the Caroline Islands. In June, she took part in the liberation of the Marianas and subsequent Battle of the Philippine Sea. She then covered the invasion of the Palaus. She missed the Battle of Leyte Gulf, being at the west coast for overhaul. Refitted, she returned to covering the invasion of Iwo Jima and Okinawa in 1945. The rest of the war was spent escorting raids on the Japanese home islands. Post-war, she was sold for scrap in 1963 after spending over 15 years in reserve. Massachusetts quickly completed shakedown in late October and immediately joined the force supporting the invasion of North Africa. On November 8, 1942, off Casablanca, in an hour and a half of firing, she hit the incomplete French battleship Jean Bart 5 times, knocking out her only turret. She also aided in the destruction of a light cruiser and 2 destroyers. In return, she was hit by shore fire that caused superficial damage. In early March of 1943, she arrived in the Southwest Pacific and aided in the Solomons campaign, taking up the now standard role for fast battleships of escorting the carriers. She then joined in the Gilberts invasion. In early 1944, she escorted the carrier supporting the invasion of the Marshalls. She then moved on to the Caroline Islands, taking part in the raids on Truk. She was in overhaul during the invasion of the Marianas, but took part in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. At the end of 1944 and start of 1945, she covered the liberation of the northern Philippines and the carrier raids into the South China Sea. She then covered the invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. She spent the rest of the war escorting raids on the Japanese home islands. After 18 years in reserve, she was preserved as a museum at Battleship Cove in Fall River, Massachusetts. If you're in the area, I highly recommend it. Not only is the battleship there, but they also have a sub, a Gearing-class destroyer converted under the Fram program, PT boats, a helicopter, a Soviet fast attack craft, a landing ship, a German Fritz guided glide bomb like the one that destroyed Roma, and many other things. Alabama completed post-commissioning shakedown and training in mid-February of 1943. In mid-May, she joined the British Home Fleet and spent then until early August of that year in the Norwegian Sea, both escorting convoys and trying to draw the German battleship Tirpitz out to fight. In mid-September, she joined the Pacific Fleet in the Southwest Pacific, joining in the defense of the carriers. Highlights included the invasion of the Gilberts, the Marshalls, and the Caroline Islands, the liberation of the Marianas, the invasion of the Palaus, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and the liberation of the northern Philippines. She missed the invasion of Iwo Jima due to yard work, but returned for the invasion of Okinawa. She also spent the rest of the war escorting raids on the Japanese home islands. Post-war, she was decommissioned to reserve, but like her sister, was preserved at Battleship Memorial Park in Mobile, Alabama in 1965. Again, if you're in the area, I recommend stopping by.